Welcome to Immigration Review, your weekly source for immigration case law updates and insights. I'm your host, Kevin A. Gregg, back again to review the week's presidential immigration cases, rummaging through the decisions so you don't have to. This podcast is sponsored by Kurzban, Tetzeli, and Pratt, also known as KKTP, a law firm where I'm also a partner. Whether you are facing an immigration obstacle, a serious injury, or a legal issue in your business, KKTP will aggressively protect your best interests. This podcast is also sponsored by Serenade e-Immigration. You're probably hearing a lot of buzz about how law firms are starting to use artificial intelligence. And while I recently had the opportunity to talk to the folks at Serenade about their case management system, e-Immigration, they've been making software for immigration attorneys longer than anyone else. And they're doing some pretty cool stuff with AI. They have a suite of tools that they're calling AI Workmates. That sounds like it's got huge time-saving potential. One of their tools even lets you upload a PDF and instantly creates a client profile. There's another tool that can read content on the website and instantly summarize it, which is pretty helpful when referencing historical case rulings or, dare I say, country condition evidence. They've got some other tools too scheduled for release later this year. So if you're trying to wrap your head around how to use AI in your practice, I encourage you to have a chat with the folks at Serenade. Also, check out their blog at serenade.com/blog for their recent articles on AI in legal practices. Or, of course, click on the link in the show notes. And as always, this show does not constitute legal advice and has no bias other than to keep you up to date and to enable you, my dear colleagues, to excel in court. So, without further ado, let's start the review. Look what we have here! A special episode. More likely to come soon, but astute listeners will recognize that I haven't done one of these since Ira's Supreme Court recap, replete with lots of thoughts, last July. But we're back now, and with a good one. In this special episode, I speak with the dynamic attorney duo of Rekha and Michael Sharma-Crawford. Rekha and Michael are immigration attorneys who take some of the most complex cases around, and as you'll hear, are very much just plain old aggressive litigators at heart. They have a prestigious law firm based in Kansas City. As you've undoubtedly heard on the podcast for the last few weeks, they also had the pen and sword removal defense and litigation training, previously done through the clinic at Sharma-Crawford Law and happening this year in Kansas City from April 24th to April 26th. As you'll hear in this interview and hear every week, this is not just another seminar. It's a hands-on immersion clinic, complete with mock cases and everything, and with instructors recognized nationwide as the best in the biz. Discount code in the show notes. Check it out. Seriously. Rekha's also in AILA leadership and even has two children's books published. One is designed to teach and comfort children whose parents have immigration issues, while the other is intended to empower young victims of trafficking. Links, of course, in the show notes. And then there's me. Enough about me. Literally have a baby in my hands as I speak. On to the show. Rekha Sharma-Crawford and Michael Sharma-Crawford, thank you for joining me tonight. It is February 24th, 2025. Always try to pin stamp or date stamp these things beforehand instead of forgetting until the very end. I'm in San Diego, as always. You guys are in Kansas City, right? Kansas City, Missouri. Not to be confused
with Kansas City, Kansas.
What is the deal with that, by the way? Why are there two Kansas cities right next to each other in two different states? And why isn't the main Kansas City in Kansas?
Economics. The economics in Kansas City, Missouri are different than the economics in Kansas City, Kansas. But if you're after street tacos, you're going to Kansas City, Kansas.
We're off on the right foot. This is going to be a riveting conversation. Thank you. Thank you guys for joining me tonight. We are friends, separate from the podcast. You guys are married. I met Michael for the first time at a conference in Idaho where you picked me up from the airport and you didn't even know who I was.
Correct. I had a car and I was bored, so I was picking all kinds of people up, you included.
How did I rate on the rating of people of
I'd have given you
interesting,
five
weird?
stars. No,
You,
no, absolutely. I'd have given you five
well, it's
stars.
supposed to be the other way around. I give you 5 stars as the
No,
driver, but it's fair enough. Rick, I'm not sure when I met you. I definitely voted for you to join the AILA board a couple of years ago when you guys were out there really, really advocating for the vote and deservingly so. I can't remember when we met. Do you remember?
No, I don't know when we met for the first time. I want to say it was at this a South Florida chapter conference. It's probably when we first met in person.
Maybe. I mean, it's hard for me to tell either because I knew of both of you before you knew of me because I'm definitely newer into the field and you guys have both been heavy hitters in the immigration world and removal defense and beyond for quite some time. So I'm happy you guys are on the podcast tonight.
Well, thank you for having us.
we're
I hope
glad
we
to
don't
be
drive you crazy.
You might, but
Okay.
the beauty of being the podcast host and the editor is that, I mean, you can really do whatever you want. So, you're really at my whims. And if you don't drive yourselves crazy, I'm sure you won't drive me crazy.
We'd like to joke that I'm the introvert and Michael's the extrovert. And we can usually balance each other out unless we're at home on the same day, working remote on the same day. That's probably a bridge too far.
Yeah.
You think, Rekha, that you're the introvert of this relationship? I don't know you guys very well, but that is a surprise. That's a surprise to me.
100%. I'm
Absolutely.
a classic introvert and a classic Aquarian. That tells you what kind of a crazy mix that is.
Let's just assume I'm not an expert on the signs. What does that mean, please?
Michael, what does that mean? I'll let you explain it.
That means that there is a level of exhaustion that comes after a day of encountering human beings that is, depending on how far it is, can be debilitating. And she wants to go home and be in that safe space and de-stress from there with one of the mini fur babies running through the house.
Oh, wow. The cats, to be clear.
See, you didn't answer his question, Michael. He asked you about the sign. See, he did not ask you about being an introvert. He knows what that is. So
the classic warrior posture comes from part of that Aquarianism. The introversion is your mix into that sign. I'm the comforter. I'm the nurturer. I'm the warm hug that comes from everybody because I'm the Cancer. But that's not the Cancer, but the sign.
Right. It's an unfortunate sign for that description. I don't know, that I guess it's also kind of like my wife then, I guess, Rekha, because I would never think of you as an introvert because you're out there, you're so much out there, but I guess that's what the position, the lawyering demands. And so it's all not an act, but you'd rather be at home with the fur
trial lawyer,
baby.
Kevin, right? I'm a trial lawyer. That's all that courtroom experience that you get up for the theater of trial work. So yeah.
What is the Aquarius? Is that the summer? What months are that? Is that
January? No, January,
January.
February, yeah.
Okay,
But
well,
we're eclectic. We're kind of the way Michael always describes me is like, if you were a Harry Potter fan, I would be Luna Lovegood.
yeah, I wish I was deeper in Harry Potter. I know I should not. I'm a more, can you give that in a Lord of the Rings?
I mean, no. I mean, because there's nobody serious. Luna Lovegood was this person that saw things that nobody else did and said things that nobody else understood. And in that moment, people went, that's so weird. But then suddenly they were able to see what she saw. And then what she said made sense. So sometimes when you come forward and you say, hey, Lazada, we should be able to attack that at the state level because it's the state. And now the feds are coming in and demanding that the state act in a certain way. People go, that's weird. But then when you start to think about it, you go, that makes sense.
I would think the closest I've got is Gandalf for Lord of the Rings, but we have gone far off the rails from my outline, but we've touched.
I warned you.
You did. You mentioned it, Rekha. Trial lawyers. You guys both started out as state criminal court prosecutors, isn't that right?
I started out
You
as
did.
a state criminal. Yes. Michael was in law enforcement. He was a sheriff's officer.
That's right. So he was your witness.
He was.
Yes.
The
best witness she ever had.
Yeah, but stayed on the stand a little too long. So that's actually even better, Rekha and Michael. If you could start, Rekha, how did being a state court criminal prosecutor, How do you bring, what do you bring to immigration different from others? What skills do you learn and bring? And I don't know, what surprises you about immigration practice after being in state criminal court for so long?
The thing of it is it's exactly right. Is that when you're used to a real courtroom with real judges that make real decisions and objections that get ruled on and evidence that's properly admitted and authenticated, and you get to immigration court and you get pushback from ICE agents saying things that are like, well, I'm talking to your client. No, you're not. It was one of those things that I think gave me the ability to say, I'm not afraid of what the government's going to do because I've been a part of the government before. So I'm not really mystified by what they're going to do. And you hold people accountable. The rules of evidence, the rules of procedure, they still apply. Just because the government says they don't apply doesn't mean you don't, work from that part or work from that stance and build your case from there. So, storytelling elements, we do that all the time. We know that people are persuaded most in the realm of storytelling. So, when I came to immigration removal defense, I kind of approached it from the same place, which is how does a trial work? Normally, I was really just kind of mystified by the fact that there were no rules of evidence, no rules of procedure, no rules of anything. And I will tell you, Kevin, I spent probably the first 2-3 years of my immigration removal defense practice getting thrown out of ICE offices because I was just apoplectic is the nicest way I can say it with what they were doing. And so, it's just one of those things that once a trial lawyer, always a trial.
You touched on a few things there that are interesting. The first one being storytelling. That is what we do. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win for your client, but it is necessary to be able to tell the better story, the better narrative, to use the truthful facts in the best way possible. Better than the other side, that your story is better, right? What we do is pseudo-criminal defense.
Yeah, I think that's it, right? I think as lawyers, and especially my impressions when I first started doing this and interacting with other individuals who were doing removal defense, is I felt like they weren't thinking about it in terms of what are the elements that we have to prove, right? As a criminal prosecutor, that's how I thought. My world was, what are the elements of the offense? What do I have to prove? And then I had the burden. So I have the burden in immigration practice it wasn't daunting to me because that's really all I'd ever done was know the burden. But in terms of what are the elements of what we have to prove, there are statutory elements, there's discretionary factors, but people would say they didn't understand what the elements were, and they certainly didn't always understand how you tell that story. Even with a statutory element, you don't just say, this is the element. You have to kind of give it some context, give it some flavor, give it some understanding. Just because someone has a criminal history doesn't mean that you don't tell their story to where did that come from? Right. What caused that moment in their life that caused them to make that lapse of judgment? And I don't think we spend enough time talking about that.
Before we get to Michael, another thing that I want to touch on is the fact that the rules of evidence don't apply in immigration court. Of course they don't. But the guidepost is fundamental fairness. And what better way to protect a non-citizen's fundamental fairness than applying the rules of evidence to the government's submissions? I am always of the opinion that immigration judges want to be judges. They are judges. They're not, we know the whole thing, but they are judges, and I consider them as such. Given the opportunity to be a judge, I think that most immigration judges are going to want to be a judge, and that includes applying the federal rules of evidence, at least when the alternative is taking away something and doing something that's fundamentally unfair.
I think there's two parts to that. It's fundamental fairness and not unduly prejudicial, right? The prejudicial part gets left behind. People just go, is it fundamentally fair? But if evidence is unduly prejudicial, I think you also have to bring that forward to say, look, this is why it's prejudicial, right? And I think a lot of times people don't look at both sides of that equation. They only look at one side of that equation.
For me, though, putting on direct and defending cross-examination, I always know my objections. I believe that most immigration judges want to and will apply a correct objection. Because again, yes, the rules of evidence don't apply, but also we're lawyers. What are we doing? And it just makes for better testimony. My final thing on that, though, Rekha, I'm always curious about this. The rules of evidence don't apply. We bemoan it. We're perplexed, or whatever you were when you transferred. But the fact that hearsay is admissible, that does benefit the non-citizens more than it does the government. We would have a very high burden in some of these cases if hearsay wasn't admissible. What do you think of that?
No, that's right. I mean, I think that the I-213 is all hearsay.
Well, that's true.
So if the game starts flawed, I mean, I don't have a problem putting witnesses on, right? So if we had to put on 4 witnesses, 5 witnesses, I feel like let us put our witnesses on. Live testimony is worth it. I think the game starts flawed in the sense that the I-213 that has all kinds of garbage in it oftentimes, and the government never calls a witness.
That's a good point. But I am happy for overall in my cases, I err on the side of being happy about hearsay being admissible. And I use that to the maximum extent possible, by the way. I like bringing in live testimony and then having them testify to hearsay or testify to something that happened in their home country 15 years ago that some person said, bringing in an expert, having that expert testify to something that he or she heard. And oh, by the way, what's your opinion on that hearsay that you are testifying to as a credible witness? I think there's a lot of room for maneuverability with hearsay being admissible in immigration court.
That part is true, for sure.
So, Michael, you did not start off as a criminal prosecutor. You started off as a criminal. I'm sorry. You started off as a law enforcement. That I always mess that up. That's a joke. That's a joke.
It's all right. It's all right. No,
okay. If nobody can see it, it's a podcast. Rekha actually almost spit out her water because she knows something that I don't know, I suppose. So, were you a lawyer, Michael, when you guys started? When you guys met?
No, I was a deputy with the sheriff's department, working in narcotics, if you can imagine that.
I can imagine it.
So I had been at a DEA task force. I'd come back over from there to the county narcotics unit and jumped in to be the case officer because the team that was there had been making buys and didn't want to appear in court. So I took over as the person to show up in court. And that was how we met, was those drug cases. And then we just kept working on them because I kept making bigger cases at the state, taking them back to the federal courts for prosecution because now I had the flexibility of doing whatever I wanted as opposed to being at a DEA task force.
So I want to come back to that in a sec, but I'm curious, Rekha, what was he like as your presumably star witness and you had to prep him for testimony and he had to listen to you and when he was simply a witness?
He had to understand who I was.
Who were you?
No, I had been in her office the day before, was waiting for her in court, and she just walked in and walked around and couldn't find me sitting in the courtroom or in the judge's library. So no, I was a stellar witness.
It wasn't like that. The fact of the matter is, Kevin, I mean, the reality of it is that I was a baby prosecutor when we met, and I knew nothing about drugs, 0 things about drugs, like less than nothing about drugs. And so I relied on him to tell me, this is what this is, or educate me. Kind of we reversed roles when he went to law school, and then I taught him, kind of the nuts and bolts of being a lawyer. But I mean, he would, to be fair, screw with me at every chance he got, in the sense that he would have the evidence, sit on the witness stand, and I would say, do you recognize the evidence? Well, he just showed me the evidence 10 minutes earlier, and he'd sit on the stand and say, no, I don't recognize the evidence.
I'm sorry. You were flirting with her in court in a trial?
I'm saying that it was fiery.
That's what he was.
All the way.
Did it work?
I don't know if that's a compliment to you or a criticism of Rekha, but here we are many years later. Here we are. Why'd you go to law school?
I'd always wanted to go to law school. When I graduated high school, I was trying to go to law school and was an idiot and didn't get there. And so the opportunity came. Rekha was trying to move up in a corporate setting at that point, and that required us to move out of Wichita. And so we said, okay, then go to law school. It's what you've always wanted to do. And so I did. I mean, I was 36 when I went to law school, 2000. and then went to law school for the 2.5 years and graduated and went back to work. It was a different experience for me than it was for half my classmates. The school was a little unorthodox in the sense that it had people as old as I was at the time, people older than me, and then you had your traditional fresh out of undergrad going to law school folks. And so it was a mix of things. And so it was really just go in, get the license, get out, and get back to work.
It is amusing as I sit here at 38 years old. I remember I took 1 year off between undergrad and law school. I remember being in law school with individuals like you who had had whole careers and were 36. Some of them were I guess you guys were married or in a relationship by that point. And I just remember looking at those people like, those people are ancient. Like those people those are like the real adults. Don't get me wrong, I was serious in law school and I knew I had an idea of what I wanted to do, but like those. But now here I am sitting 38. I mean, those 36-year-old's a kid. Who am I kidding? Someone who had already been in court as a witness going into, a crim law course. That's an interesting guy.
No, crim law courses, crim procedure was fine. Really what I found was that law school was easier for me to conceptualize at that point because I'd lived life.
Yeah.
You go into a real estate transactions course, I've bought and sold a couple of houses.
Right.
This isn't anything. Secured transactions, which sounds mystical, is buying stuff on credit. I bought a lot of stuff on credit. So when you start to break it down and want to give everybody a name, yeah, sure, I can remember that. So in some sense, it was really the age and the passage of time that gave me the advantage. Certainly, I had a different advantage in criminal procedure and in criminal law, but for the rest of it, it was just being an adult and having lived life in that society.
Then you graduate. At what point, Rekha, do you become an immigration attorney? Do you guys pair up immediately, start a firm together? How does this happen?
No, I mean, part of it was I left the DA's office and I was I'd been in the DA's office for 5-6 years and I wanted to do some corporate work and realized for like 30 seconds that I went in, did corporate work, hated it. And so I thought, okay, that's not going to work. And so, I didn't want to stay in Wichita. And so Michael went on to law school and we moved up to Kansas City. Well, we were in Lawrence, which is, outside of Kansas City. And then basically, when you're an immigrant yourself, the first thing people ask is immigration questions. And I didn't know anything about immigration. And so I apprenticed with a law firm for about a year. And then really doing their removal defense, and I kid you not, one of the things that came up is they're like, well, they took me into this room and there was this room full of files. And I'm like, what are this? And they said, those are our appeals. And I'm like, wait, you don't win at trial? I don't understand. I was very confused.
They come from the prosecution.
I'm like, I don't understand. And so I started doing their removal defense stuff. And I mean, I was an apprentice for about 30 seconds before they said, here, why don't you do the trials? And I said, okay, I'll do the trials. And we did that until Michael graduated. And then after that, we moved into Kansas City and started our own practice.
As an aside, I've been to Wichita, Kansas. I liked it. I like it. It was a quaint area.
How long were you there?
I was there for one night.
How long were you there? Good question. Passing through for lunch is not living in Wichita.
I spent the night. If I recall, I might have even camped. Well, then, Michael, why do you become an immigration attorney?
So the honest truth is if I got out of law school, had an interview with a local DA's office, and if I had been offered a job by the DA's office, right now I'd be a U.S. attorney doing complicated drug cases because they're fun. Yeah. And that would have been that. That would have been the end of it. But I didn't get the job. And so I went to work at the firm that she had been interning at. And we were there about a year and we had a disagreement and we left. What she doesn't add is that when she was interning and starting her career with that law office, they were paying her $9 an hour as a lawyer. And so we stayed a year and then we left on a Friday, and by the next Thursday, we had a 600 square foot office. We'd driven to some used furniture store and come back like the grapes of wrath with desks and chairs and things hanging inside and off the sides of the vehicle and populated an office and started working.
That's terrifying to me. And I'm not sure if it's more or less terrifying as a couple, because now all of your eggs truly are in one basket. I mean,
Yeah.
if it fails, you both fail. I'm very happy at Kurzban, Tetzeli, and Pratt. I have no desire to go out on my own, but how do you do it? Like, how you don't know it's gonna succeed. How do you go do it? And especially by that point, you didn't have that much immigration experience.
I think it's like everything else. I don't believe in failure. And so the issue is it was going to succeed because it had to succeed.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, there was really there was never really an option on the table that said this isn't going to work. Plus, notwithstanding the fact, I mean, like I said, I think we had a very unique position because, I mean, we really weren't afraid of the government. Like,
Yeah.
after 9/11, we were first, in our offices, they tapped our phones. We knew they tapped our phones because we could hear them on the phone. But
Wow.
rather than worry about it, we used to scream into the phone, look, we know you're listening, but can you please stop messing with the audio so we can hear our client? Like it was just that level of just in your face. I think I think that attitude still carries till today.
We would have conversations with ICE. Rick would be saying, you can't do this from a legal perspective in the sense that that's my client, you got to talk to me. But yet I can talk to them or can talk to them on a perspective that says, look, this is how you're doing your job. You're only doing
Right.
it this way. This is the procedural aspect of being this law enforcement officer that you are. So don't tell me there's any mystery here. There's no mystery. This is what you do. And you're going to do this, then you're going to do that. And this is what you're hoping for. There's nothing special about this. There's no cloak and veil. And we both knew it. We had been together long enough that she knew the same routine. So even if she wasn't saying, that's my client and you can't speak to him, she could also describe their procedure to them and their process because she'd had enough officers on the stand to understand what process was. And so in that sense, it became clear that we weren't going to back down. We were taking criminal defense cases. You were taking domestic cases. I took one personal injury case and I wanted to kill myself. That was horrible. But I mean, we kept just pushing the boundaries. And at some point, we realized that we had created this bubble about this crimmigration prospect that said, don't do criminal defense work, but do the removal defense work, do the advice to criminal defense counsel, and build the practice around that. And then that's when it really began to solidify.
What you say about not being scared of the government and how that is something that helps you succeed is a very good point. And I was never a criminal prosecutor, and I can't say I have. I like to think I'm not scared of the government and that I go in and that they're not scared of me, that we're going in there as equals. But what I do have and always tell people is 3 years of working first for the immigration judges as an attorney advisor and then as a federal law clerk, knowing how judges think, or some judges think, and just being comfortable in a courtroom. It's not the same thing as what you're talking about, but it is similar, and it's something that I rely on, and that's so powerful because, and to be clear, like I kind of want to throw up every time I go into court and then I start talking and off to the races. That's just my personal thing, but having something to have that confidence really goes a long way.
I don't think that you ever not get butterflies in your stomach,
Yeah.
right? I think that's what that little bit of fear is what gives you your edge. That adrenaline is what gives you your edge. So I don't think that's a problem that you go, oh my gosh, I get butterflies in my stomach. Well, that you should. If you don't, there's something wrong, right? You don't care. If you just walk in, you go, I have no butterflies in my stomach, and you don't have any skin in the game, well, then there's something wrong, right? So I think that those kinds of butterflies, it's a sign of a good thing. It gives you your
Yeah.
edge. But
That means you
in
care.
terms of not having a fear of the government, I will tell you, it's like one of the first conversations I had, maybe not first, but well into it. Back then, they used to be called not trial attorneys. What did we used to call Carl? He was chief counsel. That's what we used to call them back then. And I remember having a conversation with him, and I said, "Listen, your officers keep talking to my client and I'm sick of it. And, yeah, it's a civil proceeding, but even in a civil case, your officers don't get to talk to my client because their duty not to speak to my client stems from your license. So I'm either going to report you to the bar or you're going to make them stop doing this." They made them stop doing it.
Yeah.
Right. So, but I think that came from, because as a prosecutor, I had kind of grown up understanding that if a defendant had a lawyer, one of my officers wasn't going to go talk to the defendant because that would come back on me. So I'm like, This is kind of how that works. And so I think it was those kinds of things that, call it maybe naivete, that I didn't really understand that they maybe could. I was just like, this doesn't make any sense to me. And so therefore, we should probably stop doing it.
Well, and it didn't make sense because I'd been investigating and bringing cases to charge at federal district courts under the guise of both the DEA and back at the sheriff's department. And we were told, once they lawyer up, you can't go interview them unless you're allowed to. We couldn't do proffers or debriefings of them unless their counsel had allowed us to. So having the ICE agent go, hang on a minute, I'm still talking to your client. No, buddy, I'm standing right here. You're not talking to my client. And so That was the Wild West back then. That was the beginnings of what was going on and what happened. And don't get me wrong, I have no illusions that it doesn't happen now. But the stridency of what we do, and if we get involved, I feel like we've gotten through a point where we get more respect and people understand what we're saying.
So right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to Stokes interview you guys. I'm going to kick Michael out of the room. I'm going to ask Rekha some questions. I'm just kidding. I'm curious what it's like with two lawyer spouses not only working together, but owning a law firm together. I am half of a lawyer spouse tandem. Maybe someday we work together, maybe not. What is it like? And give me some good anecdotes about the other that are slightly embarrassing.
No, I mean, you know what? I tell you what, we truly, have our roots in working together. And so I know there are people who say, oh, I could never work with my spouse. I could never not work without my spouse. Like, we are so in sync with just kind of working a case together, right? The war room, when we work big complex cases, I mean, our kitchen becomes the war room, and we will have things all over the place, and we will run theories up and down various rabbit holes. So, I mean, I can't imagine. I always say, like when you have a lawyer who's married to like a teacher, I always say, like, what do they talk about?
Right.
Because I don't like, that's the only thing I've ever known is that we've worked together. And so we've worked cases together. And I'm like, Michael, what the hell would we talk about if we didn't talk about all of these strategies? So, I mean, I think that piece of it is very natural to us. And I couldn't imagine not working with him, to be honest. With regards to anecdotes, I mean, the big thing is, I'm telling you, man, when we are both at home working remote, and he keeps coming in and leaving all of the cabinets open in the kitchen and driving me batshit crazy. Sorry, I knew we weren't supposed to swear.
No, it's not. It's not swearing if it's related to an animal.
Okay, well, there you go. Those are the things, because in some ways, I say I'm the introvert to his extrovert, but I'm also the OCD to his ADHD. So when he opens all the cabinets,
that's a combination right there.
Yeah. So in those circumstances, it's like, oh my gosh, you go, and then Michael has a tendency to be very loud. So even though he's down the hall in our house, and he's speaking at the top of his lungs, and I always joke that the other side of the world can probably hear him. Those are things that we're like, okay, we got to work through some of those things.
Now we're talking.
No, to two things. One, we did meet and we did work together, and she's right. In some ways, the roles were reversed when I left law school. When she was a prosecutor, she didn't know anything about drugs. So every time we got something new, we would come show her. Whenever we were doing something.
I'm sorry, what? Hey, Rekha, look, I got a bar of heroin. Check this out.
This is true. This is true.
So you want to tell it? You want me to tell it?
You're going to tell him. Tell him. This is part of the anecdote. Go ahead. Tell
He
him.
was in court, and we had hit a trailer park. We'd been bouncing from, hit this place, get this dope, flip that person, write a new search warrant, move on down. So we've been working half the night doing this. And we got into this trailer, and as God is my witness, I thought trailer doors opened out, and I didn't bring a ram. I only brought a pry bar. That was said. I get into the bathroom, and you can hear the water running, and there's this kid just in tears, bent over a toilet, watching a bunch of mushrooms swirl around, going, they won't go down. So, And then we recovered some other psilocybin mushrooms. But that's the first time I'd really ever recovered psilocybin at that point. And I had a good-sized evidence bag. I tracked her down in full raid gear, black shirt, pants, gun belt, the whole bit, exterior vest, all that. Track her down where she's talking to an attorney, go tapping on the glass of the courtroom, going, come here, come here, come here, come here. And she's like, I'm in court. Come here, come here, come here, come here, come here. So she goes, I'm what? I said, look at this. And she's like, pizza? Like, no, not pizza. Just psilocybin mushrooms. This is really cool stuff.
Those were toilet mushrooms, if I'm listening to this.
I found dry mushrooms. The toilet mushrooms we let go. That's fine.
Okay.
Because the coke and the meth, with the coke and the whatever, the marijuana was gone, but the mushrooms are still there. But the obverse became my mentor. One of the first times I had to go to court, she handed me a case file and went, go to court. I'm like, I don't know anything about going to court. She said, you've been in court for years. Yeah. Just go to court. And I literally went to court, sat, watched some other attorneys, mimicked what they did in a loud trial voice, and was fine. But the anecdote, the most recent anecdote to talk about how we work together is we have a complex case going on now, 9 people, HSI, all of that kind of stuff. I went to a master for 5 of them. And the judge was offering, he said, look, you've got a suppression motion and a motion for release, not a bond motion, but we captioned it motion for release because it violated a settlement agreement. So it wasn't really a bond motion. And he said, I'm willing to give them a bond. They can pay a bond and I will let them out. And I'm going to set a really low bond and then they can pay and get out. And I said, okay, but I need 5 minutes to talk to my partner. And for whatever reason, he thought I meant the trial attorney who was sitting next to me. So he goes, okay, you can take 5 minutes. And I get up and he's like, where are you going? Don't you want to talk to her? Meaning the trial attorney. And I looked at him and went, I don't need to talk to her. I'm going to talk to Rekha. Hang on, I'll be right back. And so I went back in the back room of the court and I called her and I said, look, I think this is a good deal. I think I can do this, but you've been talking to class counsel about the settlement agreement. Are we in the okay here? Because as I'm processing this, I think it's fine, but I need to run it by her because I need to run it by her. That's how we work these cases together. She had split off a piece of it. She was running and talking to Mark Fleming and doing all that kind of stuff. And I was on the ground dealing with case files and masters and that kind of thing. And we're dividing and conquering. But in that moment, I needed those 5 minutes to go in and go, this is what's on the table. This is what I think. I think it's okay. I just need to check with you.
Well, and then we'd been working on, the motions to suppress, and I was running strategy on motions to suppress. I mean, that's what I'm saying, right? It's very intertwined in terms of how we work, in the sense that we will sit down and go, okay, here's the strategy, and then our kitchen becomes the war room.
Are you fighting like a maniac, completely overwhelmed by the chaos of the new administration? Immigration policies are shifting fast, the pressure is piling up, and clients are desperate for help. You're working around the clock, but there's only one of you. Well, Staffy's got your back. Staffy's bilingual virtual paralegals and administrative assistants handle USCIS forms, client intake, evidence gathering, and scheduling, so you're not drowning in paperwork while trying to fight for your clients at the same time. Stop running on empty. Staffy gets you a trained, ready-to-go team fast with HR-backed support, onboarding, and continuous training. You don't have time to do it all alone, and you don't have to. Schedule a consultation at staffy.cc, that's stafi.cc, and claim $500 off your first month. Elevate your advocacy and storytelling skills at the annual Immigration Court Trial College in Kansas City. Get ready for a transformative experience at the annual Immigration Court Trial Advocacy College, now hosted by the Pen and Sword, formerly the clinic at Sharma-Crawford Attorneys at Law. That's friends of the pod and friends of the Kevin, Rekha and Michael Sharma-Crawford, excellent immigration attorneys. The college convenes from April 24th to 26th and will focus on detentions, bonds, and release for 3 action-packed days of hands-on practical training and expert insights. This is not your average Talking Heads program. This is real cases, real witnesses, and real courtrooms designed to give you a real edge in your immigration practice. Put another way, this isn't just another training. It's an opportunity to transform your practice and fight for justice in a way that matters. Sharpen your skills, amplify your voice, defend immigrant rights like never before. Don't miss out, because space is limited. Check out all of the links to Rekha and Michael Sharma-Crawford, their firm, and the Pen and Sword in the show notes. And if you want to get a bit of a discount for the Trial Advocacy College, click on the link in the show notes or use promo code IMREVIEW2025. That's IMMREVIEW2025. Keep up and join the good fight. We're still recording. What has happened here is real life, attorneying for all listeners. It is the end of the day, and we don't have childcare at the moment. So on my lap right now is a 6-month-old baby. Regular listeners of the podcast will recognize him from his outro comments about how he liked the last episode, and he'll actually be talking about that here. So Rekha and Michael are getting to see him. For all of the listeners, if you hear some baby sounds during the rest of this interview, that's not me. That might be Michael. It's not Rekha, but it's probably my son who's sitting right next to me. Returning to what you guys were saying, I think that's beautiful. I loved both your answers. And it's wonderful that you have found both a professional and a personal and life partner. What you said, Rekha, struck me because I say that all the time as well. People, they like to make jokes about attorney couples, like you guys must argue all the time and stuff. But I think the same thing. And don't get me wrong, there are more couples with one attorney and one non-attorney, so they're making it work. But I don't know what else we'd talk about. I'd probably talk about the same thing. She just wouldn't know what I'm talking about. And it wouldn't be nearly as engaging of a conversation.
I think we go down lots of rabbit holes.
Right.
We do. Who's the bigger law nerd between the two of you? Because Rick is absolutely a massive law nerd. It is all about the minutia and the granular. And we go down those rabbit holes quite frequently.
Between my wife and I?
Yeah.
Well, she's a great lawyer. I'd say I'm the nerd. You got to remember, I am the one with the case law podcast.
True.
Spending my evenings and weekends reading. But on the other hand, it was all her idea. So who is the nerd? Because she's the one listening to some of the nerdy podcasts who thought that it would be a good idea. So I think it's me. Although once she starts going on some of the cases she's working for, she's a career law clerk. She can get in there. And she'll, talk about joinder of multi-parties and some MDL regarding multiple drug manufacturers. And does, is state law preempted by Fed? Yeah, I'm like, all right.
Interesting, isn't it? It's interesting that here we are, in 2025, and we're still litigating a law that was written in 1996. And we keep telling clients, well, under the new law, and they're like, when was the new law? Well, under the new law, it was in 1996, right? But there's so many things, and they've taken such a Band-Aid approach to it that I think I agree with you, Kevin, is it is intellectually stimulating, right? Sometimes we'll be working something and I'll say to Michael, I'm like, this is almost like contract theory. And he'll be like, I don't know where you're going with this, but I mean, it does kind of happen like that. And so, I think it is one of those areas of law that allows you to kind of push into other areas as well and use it.
When I was doing narcotics work, there wasn't any case law on search and seizure. Wilson v. Arkansas was new. Airport stops were new. Everything you did was making case law or had the ability to. And it's no different here. You're scraping edges of everything, whether it's the Adam Walsh Act or we're back to search and seizure at this case that we're dealing with, that we've been dealing with recently. And I've got to go to court on 4 more tomorrow. You're hitting these edges over and over again where they start to rub against each other. And sometimes they match and there's a groove worn there that you can rely on. And sometimes there's not. Those two pieces are just sitting next to each other. And it's up to you to articulate what that intersection looks like and what the court should take as its meaning or not take as its meaning as those two pieces start to interact with each other. You should be excited about it if you're going to do it and do it well.
I absolutely agree. I'm not going to lie though, Michael, I'm not looking forward to making the Lake and Riley Act arguments, especially with a client who's by definition in immigration prison. and honestly probably just wants to give up, which of course is the point of the draconian law
Right.
of putting people in mandatory detention who got a petty theft conviction or
We got a
arrest.
petty theft arrest.
Petty theft arrest at 18 years old, 19 years ago. It's just, it
I keep
blows
thinking
the
about
mind.
I keep thinking about the shady business guy who goes, oh, those guys took my tools and gets a case made on a bunch of people that didn't, but he wants to get rid of it and doesn't want to.
I'm not convinced you even need a case made.
No, I think part of it is that it also shows I mean, I wouldn't take away from, the people that pass it, but when you look at the language of it, you do question. And it passed with bipartisan support. And it's like, do you guys not understand how the criminal justice system works? That's the problem, is there people who don't seem to understand how the criminal justice system works?
I don't think we've given some elements of the Republican Party enough credit over the years. I think a lot of them do know how a lot of this works, and they're doing it. So I don't think all of them are ignorant, and that might be the reason that a fair amount of people vote for it. But that's just my opinion. Some of this stuff does seem pretty intentional to get at the weak areas of our practice and other areas of American society. But the other thing, Rekha, is that was such a measured criticism of the senators and congresspeople who voted for this, knowing that you're not allowed to curse on this podcast. And I just want to clap for you, because I know that was difficult. It was actually a beautiful thing to watch. Articulate that like a politician. It was amazing.
I mean, I appreciate that. I mean, I know that you say that they do understand it. But I will tell you though, is that I think they don't understand, honestly, that there's so little due process in immigration court. Yeah. And I think they don't understand that.
It's a perfect way into the next segment of my interview with both of you that I really want to talk about. We're talking about all these creative arguments, how to put on witnesses, the things that we as removal defense and just immigration attorneys generally have to do to represent our clients, because the law is written to deport more people, at least when it comes to 212 and 237 of the INA. You guys have the pen and sword coming up. Tell me about what that is, Rekha.
Yeah, so, for the longest time, we had the clinic at Sharma-Crawford Attorneys at Law, which was a nonprofit. And when, after 13 years, we had it for 13 years, and it was a direct service nonprofit, which means they represented clients in removal proceedings. And I will tell you that with the funding issues for direct services, it just became too much. And it was just time for it to evolve into something different. And so rather than outright dissolve the nonprofit, we decided to repurpose it for the goal of providing greater education and greater training for people, because we do see a lot of newer practitioners coming into removal defense. And I think there is a very big need for individuals to get training in how do you go into immigration court and really fight the case. This is the same thing I was saying when I started, 25 years ago, and here I am still saying the same thing now. And that is that without that mentorship, without that understanding of how to do a real trial, it's really easy to get demoralized when you go into immigration court, and people give up and they don't want to fight and they don't want to do those things. So the trial college, the immigration court trial college, was started 8 years ago. We were the first in the nation doing this. And it was really kind of born with this idea of we must make better trial lawyers. The funniest story that I have is that I was in immigration court one day, and I got slid a piece of paper that said, the federal judge wants you in federal court in an hour. And I was like, oh my God, what have I done? Right? Because I didn't know. And it turned out it was one of those situations where I had a client that I was dealing with in removal proceedings who'd gotten picked up on a federal charge, and the only person he knew was his lawyer, was me. And so the AUSA said, well, okay, if you're represented, let's go track down your lawyer. And so I went down and, and I'm not going to disobey a federal judge. I got in a car and went down there, and it was for person literally sped down there. And, it was a detention hearing, which is basically a bond hearing. And I walked in and the federal judge said, hey, do you want to leave your client in custody or do you want to have this detention hearing? You have the right to a 3-day continuance. And I'm like, I have no file. I don't know what the heck we're doing, but I don't really want to leave my client in jail. I'm like, yeah, let's go do it. And so we went to hearing. And it was a lot of fun because I got the ICE agent to admit that he had kidnapped my client and moved him around state lines. After that, I mean, the AUSA said, well, okay, well, I won't oppose bond. And so we were able to get him out. But it's that idea, right? That fearlessness of not that comfort level of being in court to be able to go, okay, well, I mean, it's a bond hearing. I can do a bond hearing.
I don't know. I think I'd ask for the 3-day continuance. Maybe I need to go to the training.
I mean, the reality of it is that that's what we teach. We teach about being fearless in the courtroom. And so the Immigration Court Trial College was created for that. And it is a real case. We create a real case with real witnesses. We have volunteers that come in. Each person has to do direct. Each person has to do cross. And on Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon, you put a trial on. And it's in the safest, most supportive way that we do this, because if you're going to do your first trial or your 15th trial and you have mentors and you have people helping you and slowing down the process and telling you this is how you do this better, this is how you tell your story, this is how you make it more persuasive. It's not just about regurgitating the law. It's about making it persuasive. How do you get to the hearts and minds of this judge that isn't going to be in your favor? And then how do you set that up for appeal? Because just because this judge isn't necessarily going to do it doesn't mean that the federal courts, when they look at it, aren't going to look at this and go, what the heck was happening here? And so it was really the first in the nation when we did it. And I mean, there's other people that have kind of copied the not exact model, but they've copied the idea of it. But I will tell you, every single faculty member has done trial work. We're not theorists, we're trial lawyers. And so it's trial lawyers passing the craft on to the next generation to become trial lawyers. The Pen and the Sword was created. Why that name is because we sometimes fight with our pen and sometimes we fight with our swords. But that's the design, is you keep fighting.
Every time we bring in a new faculty member, somebody who somebody can't come, and so we need a new immigration attorney, and we look for some of the best and brightest of our friends and colleagues out there that do trial work, and we bring them in, and they go through the training as a trainer. They come away with new knowledge, new ideas. They come away invigorated, and they go, my God, I never thought it was anything like that. Because you're walking into a training facility with people from all across the country who do trial work, who bring different perspectives to it. We're teaching direct, we're teaching cross, which rarely we get to do. I can think of a handful of times in 20 years that I've cross-examined a witness in immigration court, because that they don't bring witnesses because they don't have to.
But knowing how to do cross is the best way to be able to defend against cross too.
Correct, because you prep your client that way. You prep your own client with cross and you plug all those holes. And so you've got to have that skill, but we're teaching cross-examination, but we don't teach it. We bring in criminal defense counsel, who that's all they do is cross-examine. And so the criminal defense counsel hit the ground running and talk about ideas, talk about the language of you testifying, how to ask those questions over and over again so that you understand that you're testifying in cross and that your goal is to get that yes/no answer out of the person, your witness, and keep going. And then we change gears and go, but now we're in direct and try to get you into those mindsets. And on top of that, get you aware enough to throw in an objection now and then and what those good bombs do. And is there a timing to it? It all becomes this incredibly immersive moment where everybody bonds over moving forward. We all know what the goal is. When you come into that class and you've been doing, so what's your name? What country are you from? When did you come here? How many children do you have? And that's the way you're putting on trials. And we say, start with the bad thing, because your name's already in the record. You have a whole application with all that information that's in the record. Why are we repeating that? We all know what your name is. Why don't we start with, so when you were kidnapped, how many people beat you?
It lacks a foundation, Michael.
Yeah. but it's immigration court.
But the rules of evidence don't apply.
It actually comes down, it actually doesn't lack foundation because, again, since hearsay is allowed, you can say, as you put down in your application for asylum, and there's your foundation, right?
Right.
So that's the thing. But I think it's even more than that, to be honest, Kevin, which is that, once a trial lawyer, forever a trial lawyer. So that means that if you're doing an I-601A waiver case, right, and you're putting that down in paper, you're still creating that storytelling narrative. You're still putting in the element. You're still thinking of it in terms of what are the elements do I have to prove, and how do I say this from a legal and persuasive piece. So I think that it's broader than just even the trial in the actual courtroom work. You can use this in every aspect of immigration practice, because I think you just start to build your cases differently.
I was just speaking in Miami on 751s, talking about storytelling, especially messy 751s, where you've got a question of the lives together, or they've broken apart. You've got to tell that story. Why did that happen? Rake's got a quote that I keep using on clients, which is to say, the government is due a real marriage, but not a perfect marriage. And if it's not perfect, then let's talk about why not. Right. Because everybody thinks, I got to have credit cards, I got to have a bank account, and I got to have a dog. You don't have to have any of that. You just have to have a reason why you don't. Yes, maybe they're expecting it. But if you have a narrative that says, we don't have any of this because we each have a business, and so I keep my funds over here, she keeps her funds over here, and we call it bill night, and we sit down at the table and write checks to pay the bills, there's your answer.
I think you made a very good point, Kevin, which is that, knowing how to cross-examine helps you prepare your own client for cross-examination. It's the same thing. It just makes you look at the case differently, and you walk away with a psychological advantage. And that's what we prepare you to do.
I think you guys would agree. I mean, every case, whether it's immigration court, federal court, USCIS, Department of State, the client needs a narrative.
Yeah.
And everything they say needs to support that narrative. And if you really know your narrative, and it's truthful, of course, then there really isn't anything on cross-examination that can't be explained away, because everything in your story does support your narrative.
So many immigration attorneys don't think of the cases as having elements. It's just, well, I got to do this, and cancellation is hard because, we got to do this, and they got to be a good guy. And he's mostly a good guy, but that's okay because there's lots of hardship. No, it's not okay. You have 4 elements, and you've got to prove each element. And if you're glossing over one because you're trying to run to the narrative of the kid in the wheelchair, you're going to lose that case. And you're not going to know why you did, because you didn't view it in a way for you to deconstruct and then build what you needed as you went along.
It strikes me that so much of what both of you are saying and what you do outside your core law firm, but even as part of it, is designed to uplift immigration practice and immigration attorneys. And that's directly related to matter of Lozada, in my opinion. I mean, matter of Lozada, ineffective assistance of counsel, is what happens when things go wrong. And quite frankly, wrong is not even the right word. God forbid a mistake be made. Rekha, you and I have been working together on restructuring how ineffective assistance of counsel is seen and adjudicated in the immigration world. You really started this, at least in recent years, this idea that it all needs to be looked at and changed, and I've kind of jumped on board and tried to help as much as I can. But I want to end the show talking about amendments to Lozada, changes to ineffective assistance of counsel in immigration court, and why it's important. Because, before I let you talk, the counter argument I always hear from government and former government attorneys and individuals is, well, this will open the floodgates and everyone's just going to allege ineffective assistance of counsel if we don't make it really hard to claim. And additionally, there's already so much bad representation in immigration court and in the immigration world that the matter of Lozada elements are needed to protect against that. Taking it away makes it even worse. What are your thoughts on all of that?
Okay, then that presupposes that those issues do not exist in any other area of law, right? I mean, the reality of it is that the Lozada mandatory bar complaint requirement is an anomaly solely in immigration practice. Now, that doesn't mean that there are not same issues in other areas of practice. You have, if you want to say, well, it'll open the floodgates. It doesn't seem to open the floodgates in the criminal defense arena. It doesn't open up the floodgates in family law or probate law or any other area of law. I mean, the fact that you can have even the highest court in the land engage in unethical conduct, but not require a mandatory bar complaint is rather telling. And so, I think that we should be questioning to say, well, why is it that the immigration bar is the only one saddled with this thing? And more importantly, if it's not punitive, then what is it?
Clearly punitive.
Yeah, it's clearly punitive. And I think the bigger problem is that in an area of law that is complex and difficult, and you have attorneys that don't always go into removal defense. And so now you're going to put this out there. I think it's an access to counsel issue, straight up access to counsel issue where you create a hostile ecosystem so that people don't want to go into that area of law. I think that is part of the problem, and why for the last now 3 years, I've been taking this on to say, look, this isn't right, because I think we are human. And when you say we don't get to be human, sometimes there's a mistake. Everyone can come to the table and go, wait, this was a mistake. That shouldn't require a bar complaint.
Right.
I think that requirement, heck, even when OCC does it, when the Office of Chief Counsel does it, there's no mandatory bar complaint requirement. So you're telling me that there's never a time where they've acted inappropriately, that now you don't even have to go do that. You can just simply say, oh yeah, there's this ineffective on the part of the government. They're government lawyers, for God's sakes. They're held to a higher standard. And we've never ever really witnessed when they say, oh, we've done something and we haven't really lived up to that mandate that they're supposed to under the law. But yet they don't have to have any kind of a bar complaint requirement. I think it's punitive, and I think that we shouldn't stand for it.
It is. So to be clear, and I didn't ask the question perfectly, what we're really taking issue with is matter of Lozada's ambiguity that has been interpreted in some circuits as requiring lawyers to file bar complaints and put other lawyers' law license at risk to bring an ineffective assistance of counsel claim on behalf of what is now the new client of the second lawyer. And that is a requirement that is not found in any other area of law, as our understanding. And you even have Strickland v. Washington from the Supreme Court laying out a framework that says nothing about a bar complaint. To push back on my question, which I also had answers to, of course, is it also presupposes that the floodgates aren't already open. I mean, ineffective assistance of counsel, sometimes correctly, sometimes incorrectly, is all over immigration proceedings, that you can't stop people from trying to do work for their clients, especially if ineffective assistance of counsel is shown. And my response as well to some of these people is Strickland v. Washington, as well as Senator Murphy's bill from last Congress to get rid of the bar complaint requirement, has a prejudice element to it. It's not just a mistake was made. It's a mistake was made that prejudiced the non-citizen such that maybe he or she can win had that mistake not been made. So to not simply tether it to that and to arbitrarily require a bar complaint is really to deport people on a technicality, right? I mean, if you've got prejudice and you're still not going to give them a shot because their attorney messed up just because you didn't put another attorney's law license on the line, I'm not even sure how those two things connect.
It happens in other areas, right? You see it in particular, and of course, my background being in the criminal justice system, I will tell you that there were times where, everybody agreed that the right thing, that justice was done if we got a redo, that something had gone off the rails that required us to bring everybody back to the table to say, look, this was not what was intended. And therefore the criminal defense counsel would say, look, I was ineffective. I didn't tell them whatever, right? Whatever that issue was. And everybody could agree that true justice was about making sure that if there was a crime, that the penalty fit the crime. And here, where the stakes are so much higher, right? Families are divided forever. There are things that people with limited opportunities for relief are going to be denied that relief forever. And yet we are not willing to say hey, but for a bar complaint, there's no other way to raise this. I think that's abhorrent, quite honestly.
I appreciate you keep pushing this issue to the front. I hope you continue to push it to the front, even if there are bigger issues, even if it gets scary, even if you don't have a receptive administration. I hope that you keep pushing this issue so maybe eventually people will start to listen.
Well, I think now is the time. I'm looking for a plaintiff, quite honestly, because I think now is the time we can really take this into state court. I think state disciplinary advisors have standing to say, you, federal government, are now imposing a requirement on the state on a topic that is now fully reserved to the state. Licensing issues are not federal issues, they're state issues. And I think that a state disciplinary advisor has standing to sue to overturn Lozada as an overstep by the federal government.
I know I gotta have one. If there's a state disciplinary advisor listening to this podcast loyally, reach out. We need you. There's a lot of negative things going on right now in immigration and the world. A lot of scary things. I want to leave on a positive note, and I want to give Michael the opportunity to speak first. What can you give us, Michael?
I think that despite the ugliness, it's engendering a discussion of people that is existing at a higher level, in the sense that there's a lot of trash out on the internet. There's a lot of knuckle dragging, low ball commentary. But I think it has sparked a lot of people to have good conversations. And in some sense, to begin to have these conversations with a goal in mind. I'm finding more and more people willing to step out and say, this is the way it should be. If you didn't know, apparently the Army choir came and sang a song from Les Mis to the president that is about deposing the oligarchy. Apparently that just occurred. So they came in and serenaded the president at a dinner, I assume with Macron, and sang a song from Les Mis that talked about deposing the oligarchy.
I'm a big Les Mis fan. Now I'm trying to think which song it is.
Can you hear the people sing?
Yeah, right, of course. But they all get killed at the barricade, except Marius, who just finds love and gives up the fight. I don't know about the metaphor.
And notwithstanding the deep dive into the metaphor, I think people are beginning to feel the rebellion. I really do. To say, whether it is an intellectual one, whether it's a neighborhood on Facebook where people who would normally be quiet are starting to go, you're a really nasty human being and I don't want to hear from you anymore. I think people are beginning to say, also have the awareness to say, we voted an abortion amendment to the Constitution in Missouri, but now you didn't vote in people that would uphold it. So now the legislature is trying to tear it down. So as difficult as it is, I think lessons are being learned that will serve us better as we move forward.
A majority of America has kind of been on autopilot for many years about what kind of country we are, assuming that it's all right. But now we're being faced with a real battle over ideas of what America is. That's kind of what you're saying? And so people are starting to have a conversation. Is this the kind of country we want?
And does it really matter if I can get milk at 2 a.m? Am I really satisfied with that luxury of life that we have here? And is that sufficient? Or is there something still left to fight for?
What do you think, Rekha?
I think that we have to find pockets of joy, and we have to find enough sand to keep throwing in the gears. Because the reality of it is, it's not, that old saying, I can't believe I'm saying an American saying because I always get them wrong, but it's death by 1,000 cuts. And I think that's what we have to do, is each one of us has to just make our one cut, keep cutting. Because the issue here is they want us to give up. And so we won't. And what are they afraid of right now? Which is people know their rights and they're angry. People want, when people are asking for warrants and they're pushing back and invoking their constitutional rights, that's what's pissing them off. And my response to that is then do more of that.
To end this night, to end this podcast and this interview, what will be your pockets of joy for the next 4 years, Rekha?
They have 4 legs and fur.
That's a weird way to talk about Michael, but I'll give it to you. I'll give
I
it
don't
to you
shave
for
a
this
lot.
way.
That's where that comes from.
That's right. That's right. You have hair in unexpected places. I get it.
No, I'm not saying that, but they really are. You got to find pockets of joy. I think, find community, find support, find friends. Like we've had a delightful conversation with you, Kevin, and I think for this evening it was delightful. So that's a pocket of joy.
And I know that if we run into each other at wherever we are, that we will have more of these excellent conversations because we always do, and we understand each other, and we can have a conversation at a level that we all take something away from. And I think those pieces, those like-minded allies, or whatever word you want to use, are what we latch on to pull us to the next monkey bar, if you will, to keep moving forward.
Thank you both. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for giving me your time on this evening, February 24th.
Thanks for inviting us. We had a great time.
Thank you, friends. Stay safe.
So there you have it. I'm Kevin A. Gregg, a partner with the law firm Kurzban, Tetzeli, and Pratt, and this has been another episode of Immigration Review. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please share it with a friend and rate and review us. Each review helps new listeners find the show. And of course, subscribe to Immigration Review wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what we do and want to become a patron of the show, please check out our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/Immigration Review, or click on the link in the show notes. And if you're interested in an official Immigration Review CLE certificate, email me at kgreg@kktplaw.com with your full name and the episode numbers for the 10 shows you've listened to. Also, feel free to email me with questions, comments, or anything at all, and follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Immigration Review, or send us a tweet at ImReview. That's IMM Review. And we're always interested in hearing listener feedback. Like this review about the episode you just listened to from my very young son. Son, how did you like that episode? Indeed. If you, like my son, enjoyed what you just heard, again, please give the Patreon page some love, feel free to review the pod, reach out to me with your own kind sounds, or do anything else nice that your heart desires. I'll be back next week for a brand new discussion. Until then, I'm Kevin A. Gregg, bringing you the Immigration Review.